A lot of people ask me, how did I ever get into coaching and why? Before I answer that, one of the main reasons I got into coaching is because I was doing business turnarounds. So I've also been asked many times, how did you ever get into business turnarounds? How did that happen? And sometimes I kind of wonder that myself. But when I was working in the oil field, one of the things I learned is that I really loved the process of business. And going back to my past of going through the bankruptcy of my parents and their family farm, I really learned that I enjoyed the process of business, and that was really my passion. I was an engineer, I was drilling oil wells, but I really loved the process of business. So I relocated, changed jobs, went to Indianapolis, Indiana, became a manufacturing person. I was working as a project engineer, ended up in this little manufacturing plant, had about 130 employees, downtown Indianapolis, making all sorts of colored poster boards for several different industries. That business was interesting. It was very antiquated, the equipment that they had. And I quickly rose to engineering manager, which meant that I was in charge of plant engineering and project engineering. But again, I loved the business process. So in working at this plant, the guy that hired me, soon after he hired me, he ended up retiring kind of suspiciously at the last minute. And I was to be his successor. That was part of the plan when he hired me. And he left early, so I was disappointed about that. A new manager was hired by the owner of the company. He really loused that place up for many reasons. One of the reasons was, I believe he was an alcoholic. He would go at lunchtime and drink, and he would come back and he would be a crazy man, and he would get enraged about silly little things, and he'd come up with really bad ideas. But the end result was 9 months later, the owner of the company flew to Indianapolis to fire him. Meanwhile, the plant had just started its first ever strike in over 100 years, and that was largely brought on by the fact that this guy was just a jerk. He was a poor general manager, a poor leader. He had no sense of manufacturing, no sense of process. Honestly, really no sense of business. So little did I know at the time, but the plant, not only was it in the middle of a strike, but it had been very unsuccessful financially. Sales had been sliding for years. Profits had been negative for at least 4 years. And that's why the guy that hired me got let go, and it's why what ended up being my predecessor got let go. But he was mainly let go because he created the first ever labor strike in a company at that time that was about 100 years old. Meanwhile, as engineering manager, I had increased production. I had limited the downtime. When I first started working there, their downtime was horrific. And having learned the value of lost time from the oil field experience, I was really focused on eliminating lost time. So what happened was the owner came into town, fired the guy that was in charge, and we all ended up down in a conference room. And I believe there were 7 or 8 managers, with myself being the engineering manager. But at this time, I'm about half of the age of the entire management team. Everybody's almost double my age or more. So we were sitting around the conference room table, and the owner says, we're in the middle of a strike. A lot of bad things are happening. And the owner says, we need somebody to lead us out of this. I need somebody to be in charge. And all the older guys that were getting close to retirement, quite frankly, and most of them were very angry about this strike because they had become good friends with the workers. They all kind of looked at me, and at that time they called me the kid, and they all looked at me and said, let's have the kid do it. And I was shocked. I mean, I sat there with I'm sure I had like a Kodak moment look on my face. But long story short, I did become the acting general manager, and the owner of the company I came to really appreciate. He was extremely smart, he was extremely cunning, and at times ruthless, but he knew what he was doing. And I learned a lot from this guy. I mean, I can't tell you how much I learned working for this guy. But the other thing that I accomplished pretty quickly is, we settled the strike with the help of his labor attorney and some other things. We got the plant back to work. We nearly replaced the union. We were like 3 hires short of having enough votes to decertify the union. That was not my plan, but that was the owner's plan. But quickly we returned the plant to production. We actually started it up with management, and then the union folks came back in, got the plant back up and running, and pretty shortly we were making record production. Within 3 to 4 months we were making profits, which was the first time in over 4 years. I started a safety program. At the time I took over, the OSHA rate for that plant was around 12, which, if you understand OSHA rates, that's horrendous. We pretty quickly got that to below 4 with a very hands-on, proactive, very aggressive safety plan. The other thing that I did working there is I started a TQM plan, Total Quality Management, and we were able to cut quality complaints, customer quality complaints, by over 50%. More importantly, we improved the quality rejects internally in the plant. It was a great education, great time, learned leadership. Again, almost everybody on my direct team were at least twice my age. The plant personnel were, for the most part, an older workforce, but we did amazing things within the next 2 to 3 years, and I ultimately ended up running that plant for 8 years. I enjoyed working for that owner. He was very ruthless. Sometimes he did things I personally had a hard time with, but in the process I learned a lot about what to do in business, also what not to do. Sometimes you learn as much or more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. But the turnaround process was brutal. It was long hours, sometimes working 16 hours a day, sometimes working 7 days a week. But growing up on a farm, that was kind of okay with me, kind of normal. When I worked offshore, we worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. You know, that's just the way we did it. But it was a great experience, unbelievable hands-on experience, and really formulated my experience and opinions and leadership style doing a turnaround where started out first few days, you know, I had a brick go through my windshield. I had a ball bat into my headlights. It was a pretty contentious situation, but ended up solving everything, ended up calming everything down, got the employees back to work, and had a really good working worker management relationship going forward. Biggest thing was the can-do attitude. Thank you.